turn things over to the Open Primaries president, John Updike, to get things started. Take it away, John.
Thanks, Russ. Welcome, everybody. As Russ said, we're very honored and excited to have this opportunity to talk with the dynamic.
Okay.
You got to, everyone, make sure you mute yourself. The team that passed semi-open primaries in Maine, and we're joined today by Senators Matt Pouliot, Chloe Maxman, Representative Kyle Bailey, and Caitlin Lacasse and Betsy Sweet from Open Primaries Maine. And I want to give a special shout out to Joe Pickering, who founded Mainers for Open Elections way back in 2013, and really over almost a decade got this conversation going about full voting rights for independents. So Joe, congratulations on getting the ball rolling. Before we open things up, I want to say a word about what I think is significant about the passage of this legislation. First of all, it's good policy for Maine. You now have 360,000 independent voters in Maine, a third of the population, that can now fully participate in every election. And that's good for democracy, and that's good for everybody in Maine. Secondly, how this bill was passed through the legislature was, I think, very different than a lot of what's happening at the national level. This was truly a cooperative effort. There were Democrats and Republicans coming together to do what's best for Maine. There was all kinds of community involvement, different organizations from the conservative side, the liberal side, that really got together and broke through some of the traditional kind of red versus blue framings that are so prevalent in other states and at the national level. And I think Maine has a lot to teach the country about how to approach these reform issues. And finally, I think that I see Maine as somewhat of a canary in the coal mine when it comes to primary reform. I think this is a little bell being sounded that the exclusion of voters from the first round is something that is now becoming much more of a pressing mainstream topic. And this is going to open up a lot of opportunities and conversation at the national level and all over the country. So I hope 5 years from now, we're looking back at Maine as the beginning of a snowball running down the hill. So before we open it up, I want to show a quick video to take you all into the action in the Maine Senate from a couple weeks ago. And then I'm going to ask some questions. So go ahead, roll tape, Russell.
I believe this legislation will give both parties an opportunity to engage more voters who may or may not choose to eventually join a party. This is common sense legislation that we ought to support. Thank you, Mr. President.
The biggest thing that I've heard from my constituents when I was campaigning is the need to feel heard and represented. And I think the fact that almost a third of our population here in Maine cannot participate in our primary system is a good reason to not feel heard or represented. Sometimes I think the smallest ideas can go the furthest, and I think that this might be one of them. I am voting today to make sure that every Mainer can vote in every election. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doorkeeper will secure the chamber. Secretary will open the vote. Secretary will vote on the total. Chair will announce the vote. 27 senators haven't voted in the affirmative and 7 senators haven't voted in the negative. The motion ought to pass as amended prevails.
When do you ever get a 27-7 vote? I love it. I'm going to play that video before I go to bed for the next month or so. So my first question to our wonderful panel, and this is to all of you. So it's been a while, a journey since 2017 when Kyle began working with Representative Ackley on the first open primaries legislation, which was summarily defeated, to 2 weeks ago when you were able to pass LD 231. So this is a broad question. What's changed both on the ground and also in the legislature over the last 5-6 years?
I can take a stab at that one.
there's a little chaos around me at the moment.
That's okay, Tony.
I think, you know, in the 129th, the previous legislature, I did support open primaries, and I was really excited about it because I also heard it from my constituents campaigning in 2018. But it didn't pass, obviously. And I think there were some structural problems with the bills after having had the opportunity to dig into it in this session. I think there were legitimate threats and challenges to the party structure in the original bill. And that's not everyone's modus operandi. And I think it's really important to maintain the integrity of the party structure. They're critical to our democracy. A lot of people strongly identify as a Democrat or Republican, and I'm not interested in taking away anyone's identity or threatening anybody's work. This is truly about opening up our democracy a little bit more and making it a little bit more inclusive. And so I think that change in the language of the bill and the change of the tone of our organizing really set the stage for a different kind of conversation. And yeah, I'll let Senator Pouliot add his thoughts too.
Hey everyone, first I want to start by saying thank you for the opportunity to participate. It's been a real pleasure to work with this coalition, and frankly, as a legislator that was not in leadership previously, I feel that there's been a lot of strategic efforts being made this time around, perhaps even more so than last time, to connect with legislators and really kind of push this thing forward. I felt mostly through this process that I was on a ship that was already sailing as a willing and able passenger. There was a lot of work that was being done by the coalition and Senator Maxman and others. And so when I reached out to my caucus in the beginning, you know, when I was asked to kind of be a little bit more public about this, I had to go to my caucus because now I'm not just a legislator representing my constituents. I'm also, you know, somewhat of a representative of my caucus on various issues. And I sent an email out to them and I said, you know, this is where I'm at on this issue. I wasn't asking their permission to be okay with open primaries. I just said, I support them. I think they're the right policy move for the state of Maine. And would anyone have an issue with me kind of getting this op-ed published? And half of them wrote back and said they didn't really care. And half of them wrote back and said, hell no. And that's pretty much where the vote fell. So I think we just kind of, you know, me being in a position of leadership made it okay for those folks who were probably inclined to support this anyway to do it. Whereas I think in previous legislative sessions, we haven't had as much kind of buy-in from those who are in leadership roles in the legislature. So I think that helped some, but to be honest, you know, I didn't do any of the heavy lifting on this. I just, I think it's a common sense, a move that makes sense for the state. And, you know, I'm looking forward to getting it across the finish line.
Can I just add, this is Betsy.
Yeah.
Can I just add that I think also that the landscape is changing, and we were really, Chloe and Matt, as the senators, and us as organizers, and with your help nationally, we were able to really capture what's changing. And the big thing that's changing, I think, that's different than the first time we worked on this, the first two times, is that people in this country are sick of the parties. They're sick of the gridlock. They're sick of seeing, you know, what's happening. So the idea that you have to ask someone to, in Maine currently, you have to ask someone to join a party to be part of a primary, people were saying, you know, they're not doing that. And so both parties, I think the Democratic and the Republican parties, are seeing some of their base fall away. And so veterans, you know, we're most, you know, 49% of veterans are unenrolled. And for the Democratic Party, especially, 55% of youth, you know, young people are registering in record numbers, which is awesome. They're totally engaged and want to be part of this, but they don't want to be part of a party, and they don't want to be shut out of those primaries. And so I think that there really was a challenge, and Senator Pouliot was great about doing this to his party as well as both parties. Is the party, this is going to be a benefit to the parties if they decide to organize around it. And I think that finally started to click. Instead of seeing it as a threat, I think all of a sudden they said, oh, well, this might be an opportunity to invite people in. So I think that was a huge change. And I know the other thing that's huge in Maine, and I know it was in Oregon, well, is we instituted automatic voter registration. And so with that coming online, the vast majority, I know it's true in Oregon, it's true in Maine, like in the 70, 80 percentile, are registering as unenrolled. And so it's like, if we want to get to those people, we need to be able to start talking to them and get them involved and let them be, let them be part of this discussion. So I think those are a couple of things that have really changed. And I think wanting to get people engaged is really become stronger, as well as wanting to get people out. So.
Just a
That's
couple
very
of
helpful, Betsy. Go ahead, Caitlin.
just a couple of things to add. I also think it can't be understated how important it was to have Senator Maxman and Senator Pouliot and Representative Bailey and others from within the party who are very involved in their parties advocating in support of this. It is harder and a more challenging argument for an independent to be the standard bearer for reforms such as this, I think. And I think that really made a big difference between 2019 and this time, where the lead sponsor and kind of the loudest group who were, we were very deliberate in having party members submitting op-eds to those papers around the state. And that really helped because it's easy, there's a trust there from within, I think, and that made a big difference. And another piece that Senator Maxman alluded to is that we were very careful to not use language such as fighting the hyperpartisanship. And we've kept it like very, this is not an anti-party reform. This is a pro-democracy reform. And it was really important for us. And I think it helped with our success that whenever we asked anybody, to write a letter to the editor or submit testimony or submit an op-ed, whenever we were speaking to volunteers about how they would speak about this, we coached them and tried to be very careful about the language we used. And I think that helped leave the door open for some people, for some legislators who may be opposed or were undecided early on. The waters were warm and it was still inviting. They did, when they finally reached a point that they were ready to support. And I think that was a really important piece of our strategy, was to keep it positive, to keep those doors open. So if we heard from a legislator that they weren't supporting, we didn't flood their district with negative comments. We flooded their district with positive pro semi-open primaries comments, but nothing directed at those legislators. And I really do think that helped in our strategy.
That's enormously.
I just wanted to jump in here, John.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Kyle.
Sorry, John. I think there's a lot to drill down into from what Betsy and Caitlin and Senator Maxim and Senator Pouliot alluded to, and I hope that participants in the call will drill down. I see sort of three reasons for the success of this reform in Maine,
Right.
And the first two piggyback off each other. I think were alluded to by the others, but the persistence and the creating a sense of inevitability around this reform is certainly something I heard the latter from my colleagues in the House. And I think the second is really directly related to the first, which is the professionalization and the resourcing of this effort. I mean, I have to give huge credit to the extraordinary leadership of Senator Maxman, who really stepped forward to lead this effort in the
Right.
Senate and be a champion, not just a supporter, but a champion of this reform. And Senator Pouliot and the Senate President Jackson. And, Betsy and Caitlin did an extraordinary job of organizing people and doing all the right things, whether it was pulling Senator Olympia Snowe into the conversation, and doing all the smart strategic things that they've alluded to that I hope we'll drill into. And I do think open primaries, John, Jeremy, your team really helped to secure critical funding for this effort over the long haul, going back to our 2017 effort. But I think a third piece, which is really interesting that I see as someone who's worked in the election reform space in Maine and across the country, is something that Betsy alluded to, which is the context. And a context piece that I think is key here is also the normalizing and mainstreaming of election reforms generally in the state of Maine. I think more specifically, the role that ranked choice voting played in helping to change the conversation. And I wanted to say something about that point in particular, because the other panelists have done a good job and we'll speak to the other components. But I think over the last 5 years, we've dramatically changed the landscape and the context for this debate in Maine. And I really credit that in large part to the multi-year campaign that many, but not all of us who were advocates for on the campaigns to win, protect, and expand ranked choice voting in our state. And I think it helped to change the attitudes towards election reform, especially among Democrats and independents. And I think it also made, frankly, some of these other reforms look almost easy or at least achievable because ranked choice voting was such a heavy lift. And there was a time not long ago when, election reform issues in our legislature were looked at as peculiarities. So if you pushed for election reform of any kind, be it a primary reform, ranked choice voting, redistricting, you were viewed as someone who either lacked an understanding of how politics actually worked, or you're just really an outlier. Oh, here comes the semi-open primaries person again, cue the eye roll. And I can say this honestly, because I once held those views, as well, that serious political operatives and politicians don't work on or lead on these issues for fear of risking reputations. And, Republican legislators really bolstered this win in both chambers and helped to make it a clear bipartisan and nonpartisan issue. And that's an important part of the story, especially I think for advocates to share. However, I think it's important to note that we won in a Senate that was dominated by Democrats and in a House that's controlled by Democrats, because we actually doubled Democratic support for this legislation in both chambers in just a matter of 2 years. And that dramatic swing happened because of all the things that, the senators and Betsy and Caitlin talked to, and we'll drill into deeper. But I do think the changing landscapes and the context for this debate really hastened the day for this victory. And if any one of those three components had not happened, the persistence, the professionalization, resources, the context of change, I really don't think we'd be having this conversation today. And so I do think that we ought to think about how these reforms interact with each other and help to catalyze these efforts that were underway to open our democracy and make it stronger.
That's really insightful, Kyle. It's I think really important that the whole issue of context, because I love hearing you describe that we passed ranked choice voting, and now every reform has to be taken more seriously because the whole landscape has changed. That's really, really insightful. I want to pick up on something, Caitlin, that you said, because I think it's really important. And Chloe, both you and Matt also hinted at this as well. This is the whole question of this is not anti-party, this is pro-democracy. And it just struck me that I wondered if you think there are opportunities to nationalize that message, because unfortunately, with some exceptions, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party nationally, they do view open primaries as more of an existential threat in different ways. I mean, the Republicans are they're trying to close primaries in states that already have them in about 10 states. And the Democrats are trying to completely ignore this issue in their HR 1 approach in Congress. And I'm just wondering, do you think kind of developing that message of this is not anti-party, this is pro-democracy, is a way to chip away at some of that institutional opposition from the parties?
Yeah, go ahead. No, I absolutely think it is. And I think we have to talk about democracy. And I think part of the context also is that I think a lot of people think our democracy is in trouble, that we are it's really threatened. And so this idea of leaving out vast swaths of voters is, I think people are like, oh, geez. And I think the other thing is that, to see the dwindling interest in the parties have got to wake up. And Senator Pouliot said that, Senator Maxman said that, when we see that people just aren't that interested. And I also think there's a small thread about this is a way to avoid, I don't know, that's maybe not avoid, or slow down interest in third parties, and creating a whole separate third party, because if they can participate as they want, then they don't feel so shut out and necessarily then decide they're going to go start some other kind of party, which I know is a long shot, but it's definitely got an undercurrent going. So I think this is a way that we got the parties, I think, more interested in saying, oh, yeah, maybe we should open our doors and let them in, you know?
So one of the things that I said, which is true and frankly was the primary basis for my support as a fiscal conservative, is that every taxpayer is paying for these elections. Every taxpayer should be able to participate. And I think
Right.
when Senator Davis reached over to me, him behind Senator Maxman in the clip of the video, asking me a question about, should I support this? And I said, well, you paid for it and all your constituents paid for it. You know, and he's like, I hadn't thought of that. You know, I feel like that that's a very basic, super basic kind of case to make. Definitely partisanship. But to answer your question, I think there's a lot of people who are out there who don't identify with a party, and particularly in Maine, which is a very purple state anyway, that are like, what the hell, I'm paying for this, why shouldn't I be a part of it? And, you know, I think that, you know, maybe in choosing a ballot, you know, on that day of primary and they vote for somebody and then they start kind of engaged at an earlier date than election day in November, or 2 weeks before when they start waking up and paying attention, that we have a better chance of them maybe attending an event with that person who's a candidate or whatever. And then they're like, oh, well, I like what they've got to say. Maybe they want to join the party too, you know? It gives some more of a reason for engagement earlier on. You know what I mean? Which I think could then potentially translate to joining a party. And in my opinion, who cares if it doesn't, if they're participating, you know what I mean?
Right, right.
I think that there's a lot of people that would identify either way, but they just don't want to ascribe themselves to a platform, you know? And so if they then turn out and vote for a Republican in November, I'd be more excited about that than Senator Maxman, but you know, it's better that they're engaged earlier. We have a better chance, I guess.
That's very helpful. We have like 25 questions, but before we open it up, I just want to do a 20-second round robin from everybody and just ask you, what was the most surprising thing to you or unexpected aspect of this campaign?
For me, it was the Bangor Daily News endorsement, which we had worked at for several years, and they never. It's one of the largest, and it's a daily paper here in Maine, and they never endorse election reform. And in days before the legislature voted on it, they endorsed, and that was significant. And I know that seems little, but it was something that we had worked on, and actually it indicates a larger shift in the conversation. And for me, that was the one surprising piece.
Got it.
Well, and for me, it was Senator Olympia Snowe jumping in, which, she has not set foot in state politics in a very long time. And then the other thing that was surprising, and Matt, you can speak to this, is that I think it helped us more with Democrats than with Republicans. I think that, I think that she's really well revered as a stateswoman, and that she is. And I know that for many Democrats, they were like, whoa, Olympia Snowe is doing this. So it was for both the bipartisanship and the fact that she hasn't really spoken. And I would say the same actually for Jared Golden as well. Our congressional people don't usually get involved in state issues. And the fact that both of those people got involved was both surprising and important.
Yeah, my thoughts were very similar to Caitlin and Betsy. Just there was such a sense of a movement building and just all this support around us, which I don't remember feeling before. And that was just it's so exciting. I think it's a lot easier to push through these kinds of reforms when people feel like they're doing the hip, cool thing, rather than when it's some weird outlier idea.
I don't really have much to add. I wasn't really surprised by anything. I thought it would pass, and you guys, like I said, really, I was more of a passenger in this ride, trying to encourage others and so forth, frankly, versus a champion like Representative Bailey or Senator Maxman. Not that I don't support this effort, but I had to walk a fine line as a leader. with not pissing off my caucus, those who didn't support it, and also, supporting the effort. So it was a little bit, I think if I were just a member of the legislature and not in leadership, that I would have been more full-throated about it, like I have been with some other things that are viewed to be, I would say that the Republicans in the legislature view this to be a more progressive measure. And I don't know if that's because of those who are behind it, small state, and people know all this stuff's going on, right? And there was a little bit of cynicism, I guess, thinking that this was a Trojan horse to come in and strip us of our identity as Republicans. I don't buy into that narrative, but I guess I wasn't really surprised by anything. It all worked out great so far. I'll be surprised if something happens with this on the appropriations table, or if the governor chooses to veto it. I would be shocked. So those still remain, but I don't think that those surprises are coming.
Well, and I'm going to say, I don't think we can understate the importance of Senator Pouliot's support. And how hard it was. Because he is not just a rank and file legislator. He is a leader of his party. And so Senator Pouliot, hats off to you, because it was courageous and hard when you have a divided caucus. That was really, really important and a really politically courageous thing, I think, to do. So, and I think people were inspired by it.
I don't feel like it's courageous when it makes sense.
Well, we'll hold to the courage part.
I just want to say, Matt, Senator Pouliot has been a longtime supporter of this, so there was no arm twisting this session to get him there. He was already there, and I think the consistency in his support, and the fact that I think the last round in 2019 that we pushed for this was the first time there was a Senate floor vote, and so we actually got, I think, 5 or 6 senators, Republican senators, to vote for it. So it wasn't for some of them at least who were still there, it wasn't, I voted for this last time. So it was an opportunity to build on that coalition, which Caitlin and Betsy were brilliant at. And to the professionalization point, I think also brought in some Republican professional lobbying support over the last week or so to push this through. And I'll tell you, on the House side, what was surprising to me was, we were working behind the scenes to see if there were any Republican House members who were planning to speak. And I believe there was some pushback from their leadership to not necessarily support this, but not sort of strong arm anyone. But there was a floor debate, a couple of folks spoke, and then a Republican decided to get up and speak. And when the Republican decided to get up and speak, suddenly I think 3 other Republicans decided to get up and speak too about why they were supporting this. Not only did it help pick up Republican votes in the House, but I think to the point that was made earlier, moderate Democrats and conservative Democrats from rural areas, which we have in Maine, look to Republican voices to get permission to support this. And when they saw that it was a bipartisan vote, it made it easier for them to follow along. And I think, I think the point I made earlier, the freshman and sophomore Democratic classes, at least in the legislature, and I think to some extent the Republican classes, those younger classes are more familiar and accustomed to these types of conversations, that they're not the odd entity. And I think the other key piece that, the Bangor Daily News editorial, the Senator Snow piece, all those things added up to, in addition to the incredible work, is getting in the Maine legislature, getting a majority committee vote in support of a bill. This is the first time that happened. And it surprised me, frankly. That was what was going to be the biggest hurdle. And a committee that I think has several conservative Democrats on it who are not champions, who have not been champions of election reform, including the House chair, who's a really good guy, but has not been necessarily a champion of election reform. He got up and spoke on the floor in defense of this. So that, along with Republican legislators, got us a strong vote in the House. But the committee vote in particular, because folks will, at least in the majority, tend to, there's a lot of, in the Maine legislature, citizen legislature, follow along with trust that the committee has worked the bill. And that was a piece of it, I think, in helping to flip a lot of Democrats who'd voted against it before, because a majority said on the committee report ought not to pass. And suddenly it was ought to pass as amended. And so they then had permission, and we're going to go in that direction because they're going to follow the light of the committee chair. And that made a huge difference. And I also think having the Democratic Party, which Caitlin and Betsy and Chloe did a brilliant job of getting them to be neutral on it and address that Chloe mentioned earlier, address some of the concerns the party had about delegate selection and adapt the bill to reflect that. It was smart. and it worked, and it got the committee vote that was needed to propel this forward. I think that was a big game changer.
Yeah.
Well, and just for a little human interest for those of you who are organizers, so you can imagine, right? So we really worked hard to make this a bipartisan effort and not led, right? So we are telling our Democratic supporters going into the House debate, don't speak, don't stand up, don't speak, no floor speeches, just, you know, just have the committee chair, you know, don't speak, because we were having a hard time getting any Republicans saying that they wanted to stand up and speak. So then we're sitting in the gallery listening, and all of a sudden it's 1, 2, 3, 4 Republicans, and we're just like, oh shit, we have to get some Democrats to speak. It's a Republican effort, you know. And so it was just, I mean, you can appreciate it. It was so funny. It was just, now since we won, it's very humorous. But we were like, everyone was like looking at us like, what do you mean you didn't want us to talk? So it was funny.
One thing I want to add real quick before we get to the question. The efforts that I've been involved with since I started in the legislature is with the National Institute of Civil Discourse, and I've facilitated trainings around the country with state legislatures called Building Trust Through Civil Discourse. And I was actually in the state of Oregon doing this with the full legislature like 4 years ago. And we were in this roundtable discussion where everybody was sharing their political journey. And the president of the Senate came up to me before, he's like, there's no way I'm not going to share my backstory. Well, he was like 3/4 of the way through the crowd. So by the time it got to him, he was like, all right, I'm not going to be the only guy that doesn't do this, you know. And he shared his political journey, right? And it was really interesting to watch everybody in that group kind of be like, aha, now we understand why this guy operates this way, right? My point is that in doing this work and sharing information over a period of time, you start to build trust, you know. And what Senator Maxman and I, this is our first term serving together, but I've already felt like I can trust the work that she's doing. I hope that she can trust the work that I'm doing, because we're just open and honest with each other about things. And to some extent, I think that the players that were involved this time around, there's been a lot of work that's been done, you know, by this coalition for a number of years, as you mentioned, to build that trust with legislators, so that now it's gotten to the point where it's like, okay, it just kind of really makes sense to do this and to work on it. So I think to the extent that there is better communication and this is something the other side, particularly Republicans, really feel election reform is just like this really sophisticated gotcha approach to running us over, you know? And,
yeah.
But the more and more people are participating and involved, I think over time we'll start to see some of these things become more of the norm nationally.
I think that's so important, Senator Pouliot, that whole issue of trust. And there are unfortunately efforts to enact political reform that are one party trying to screw over the other party. And they're not motivated by, hey, let's build something new that everybody has a stake, you know, a part of. And I think that actually sets back the cause of reform when it's done for partisan reasons. All right, we've got a million questions. We have like 6 people that want to know about implementation. So I'm going to ask Cathy Stewart from New York to ask the question for the 6 people that have questions about that. Go ahead, Cathy.
Great, thank you, John. Congratulations. I had tears in my eyes as we watched the video clip of that vote coming down. Just great work. I've been happy to play a small role with our network in the state. Here's my question. Can you guys speak to it? And it's probably too soon, and we have till 2024 before it will be implemented. But in California, there's been some challenges when the bill was first passed there, when nonpartisan elections was passed, at the Board of Elections level, at actually communicating to independents that they now had the franchise and could vote in the primaries. And I wonder if you guys have thought about that. And also, I'm hearing all kinds of implications that will set us up very nicely, I mean, given the breadth of the support and the breadth at which the issue broke through statewide. But I wanted to have you guys address that, and if you've thought about that, and at the Board of Elections level, et cetera.
Yeah, well, our structure is we don't have a Board of Elections in that way. So it's really our Secretary of State. And I think that our issue is going to be working with her to make sure that unenrolled voters know that they can go to the polls. Because that was one of the other arguments that we used, is there's so many things often on a primary ballot that aren't candidates. And so, but unenrolled people just don't go to vote on them because they know they can't vote in the primary. That's their sort of mindset. So I think there's going to have to be a, we've talked about this a little bit already, but we're going to have to do some real education. And I think the parties are going to do some of that education because it's going to be in their interest. But I also think we're going to have to get the Secretary of State to help us out in terms of just doing some public service announcements and, getting stuff out in the media that people can actually go vote. But I don't think we'll have any opposition structurally.
I think one other key point is that, like California's got 39 million people and Maine has 1.4 million people. So, I think it's a little easier for us to kind of spread the word here, if you will. But the thing is, there's like a 3-year run up on this. So there's going to be time to get the word out and get people understanding we can do it. I don't think we'll have a situation like with ranked choice voting where the legislature comes in next time and tries to dismantle it.
Great. That's anything to add? Anybody else? Okay. We have a question from Michael Eng of Oregon about some of your tactics. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi there. Thanks. Congratulations. I was wondering, you all went the legislative route as opposed to a ballot initiative. I'm not sure how you're structured there in Maine, but that's being considered in Oregon, ballot initiative as opposed to a legislative strategy. I think it's probably because there's suspicion that the majority Democratic state legislature might try and twist things around a little bit. So there's that question about your initial strategy. Another one is that you sequenced it. First, you passed ranked choice voting and then open primaries. And we're debating that it seems that perhaps open primaries seems to be a more fundamental issue first to deal with. We're also thinking about how we might link it. And I just wondered what your thoughts are about the sequencing of, say, other types of voting method reforms, such as ranked choice or others, versus open primaries. Thank you.
I can speak to the first question about, so Maine does have a citizens initiative process, and we had worked, there have been several pieces of legislation introduced over the last decade or so involving semi-open primaries. And one thing was clear was that with each session, the popularity and the interest in semi-open primaries had grown. And we really thought in looking at this session that this could be the year. And in fact, Senator Maxman and different legislator also, Representative Grayson Lookner introduced a similar, virtually identical bill for semi-open primaries before we had actually decided to take this on again this year. So I'd like to say there was that we thought very carefully about it, but the opportunity in part presented itself, whereas we knew that we had champions in Senator Maxman and Senator Pouliot, Representative Bailey, and some others, including Representative Lookner, who introduced identical legislation. And we said, well, let's put our organizing capacity behind this legislative effort this year. And it really felt, for all of the reasons that we had, that we've explained and touched upon, that this could be the year. And we already had a base and an infrastructure in place from 2019. So we already had a baseline of which legislators we thought would support this again because they voted on it last time. And we already had a base of volunteers and some new volunteers. I see Jeremy Lynch on the call, who has put in hours helping us, doing spreadsheet work and asking his friends in districts where we needed more context to the legislators, reaching out to his own networks to do that. And so, we had some of that base on which to build on. And so because of those reasons, we really thought this could be the year. But I will say several people were kind of whispering at me saying, if this doesn't happen, well, we're going to reform if we need to. So I'm glad that it looks like we're going to be okay in this strategy. And I suspect Representative Bailey has some thoughts on RCV and semi-open primaries, not to put you on the spot, Kyle, if you're there, but. who probably has.
Yeah, I think, Caitlin, you're absolutely right. I think that, my advice to people in other states who are looking at this, and just, Caitlin said it and we've been talking about it, but this was a semi-open primaries bill to allow unenrolled voters or independent voters to vote in party primaries, not nonpartisan elections. So not doing away with party primaries, which is a separate issue. And I think that just got to be smart and strategic about how you sequence these reforms. And I think, to a point that John made, understanding and the landscape and knowing which ones are being advocated for by more partisan entities, and what the timeline is for those and their intentions, and how these things may or may not interact and be perceived by people in leadership and people who have power to influence the outcome of these bills in the legislature. And if you're going the citizen initiative route, understanding the politics of your state, certainly Alaska, this past election cycle had a top four with ranked choice voting and an election reform, a campaign finance reform package, all bundled into one. And it sort of just hobbled over the finish line in a state with about 56% unenrolled voters. So, I think you have to do the smart work and bring smart people in who understand the political landscape to know what's the right sequencing, the right relationships, and the trust that, Senator Pouliot and Senator Maxman talked about is hugely important, especially if you're going the legislative route, and building those relationships of trust, and understanding what the right sequencing is, whether you should be packaging reforms together, whether you should be moving them incrementally. Certainly the legislative process is an incremental process. And I think moving this legislation forward, as I mentioned earlier, was more feasible because the landscape had shifted and there were other things happening around reform that, were at least perceived as heavier lifts or bigger things that had already happened. And so it made this seem, like a no-brainer and lean people in that direction. So I think you just got to be smart about how you, if you're pursuing these reforms, what the right sequencing is, and whether or not it makes sense in your landscape and your political players, and who's going to, spend money against whatever it is, who feels threatened by it, what you want to package together and what you don't want to package together.
I think something you said earlier, Kyle, is very relevant here. And I think we should have a whole conference on this issue. I'm serious about how passing one reform, it changes the total environment to pursue the broader reform conversation. That's profound.
That's right.
And I think that's something that we need to drill down on as a movement, strategically, tactically, philosophically. How do we put these pieces together in ways that can be most impactful?
And can I just say, just on that for a second, in Maine, it was really important because it not only do we pass the reforms, but people see that they're working. So in ranked choice voting, and and this is for the Democrats anyway, we had a congressperson who won and defeated an incumbent because of ranked choice voting. So it's not only that they're there, but they're working. And I also wanted to say, it cannot be understated how important Senator Maxman was and her leadership, because Senator Maxman won in a district that hasn't been, she is she unseated a Republican leader, and the first person to unseat a sitting Republican since like 1980 or something. It's been a long time. And so the fact that, people pay attention because she's a brilliant campaigner, she's a brilliant candidate, and she's a wonderful human being, but that can't be understated. Like, I think if it had come from somebody else who had not shown that she could actually reach out to both sides of the aisle and to all these unenrolled voters, who had not already, she came with this incredible proven package of, I can make this work. Like, we can make this work. I just did. And I think that credibility that she brought to this was absolutely critical.
That's great. All right, we're going to Margaret Kobos. Go ahead, Margaret. You still there?
Hi, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, so
Where are you, Margaret? Tell us where you are.
I'm sorry, I'm in Oklahoma.
Okay.
And I see that Julie Knutson, also in Oklahoma, is on the call. And some of our questions are, we're getting together here, several of us, and I think some of our questions have been answered in terms of how to implement a strategy and whether you should do a package or, you know, the whole enchilada or just a bite. And it sounds like the bite is a good thing to do. One specific question I have is, it sounds like there was so much personal individual contact between the organizers of this effort and individual people in the legislature. And I wonder if they could describe how they put together that strategy. How long did it kind of take, you know, from the hot part of this effort, not the many, many years of background, which obviously led up to it, but you know, what was their timeline and how did they literally approach people?
I can speak to that from a kind of the organizing standpoint to start. So we started our effort in mid-January, I think it was. And one of the first things we did was putting together a whip list. So we had all the members of the Senate and all the members of the House on an Excel spreadsheet, a Google Doc, and put any past votes they took on this. And in one of our first organizing meetings, we went, just did quickly through the list and who on the call had a good relationship with which legislature and would kind of own that relationship and reaching out to them. And those, sometimes there were several conversations. Additionally, we had, you know, there were pockets of volunteers in districts where we knew legislators needed more to hear from more folks. And so we did very strategic, you know, I would reach out to 3 people in one of the districts who I knew had good relationships with a legislator who needed those touch points. And we would ask for them to make those calls and those very, you know, and Senator Pouliot talked about this. We're in Maine, we have a citizen legislature, and that really helps. We see our legislators, you know, at the store down the street. My husband plows the driveway of my legislator. Like this is, a lot of people, we see them, we know them. We can make those personal connections. And we had folks doing that from the beginning, making high quality connections. We also separately set up an email campaign where people with Facebook advertising, where people could type in their zip code and it would generate an automatic email that they would have an option to revise. And I think through that, we ended up sending about 800 emails to legislators, which is a lot. And those were legislators receiving emails from their constituents. So those, even though those were slightly more generic, and we didn't have controls to who were sending those make a big difference. And so and we did try, just tactically, we did try patch through phone calls and patch through texts, and those did not work this round. I think they've worked before, but I think in Maine, we were seeing a burnout from those. We had a very highly contentious, some highly contentious races in 2020 where there were lots of phone calls and lots of texts. And I think people were burnt out. And also, candidly, some of the political landscape, there were some voter ID laws going in the books, and people saw a text about a voting reform. And I know that some of them were punching through and then arguing for or against voter ID. So there was just a lot of things going on that made that not work. So we did it for about 3 days and then pulled the plug on that and did more of the Facebook advertising. But we were reaching out and doing, you know, conversations with folks through several channels. So I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
We also organized colleague to colleague lobbying. So we organized the co-sponsors of the bill, of Senator Maxman's bill, to actually reach out to their colleagues as well. And that was a sub-organizing effort, but I think it had some real impact.
One thing that was helpful right in the end is you guys brought in some outside lobbyists like Alex Sarah, who texted me and was like, hey, here are the 10 people I need you to text to get off the finish line. And I texted them, and I think 6 or 7 of them voted. So I'm not saying because I texted them, but I'm just saying, This is
Oh, you should take credit, Matt. Come
Go
on.
ahead, take the credit. It's very,
to kind of make, I will say this though, Caitlin mentioned emails. Emails are super annoying as a legislator. So like take the time, which you guys did, to also make the calls. The direct personal conversations are just so much more impactful. Because once you get like 12 that say the same subject line, you know what it is, you don't read it.
Right.
You know, I'm just being super candid here, just delete it. So I think it does help with awareness of how many people are really paying attention to this. I get that aspect of it. But I think it can't be understated. Those personal conversations just super, super impactful, particularly when you can get legislators to have them with other legislators. We feel more like this feels like more of a peer pressure type thing with your counterparts. Like, hey, if I don't do this, then maybe I'm like missing out or something, and I ought to do it. So that's pretty effective. But also, you know, having constituents reach out is good too, and not with like an ire of, you know, parties suck and we're burning this place down, you know, but just, don't you think that this makes sense for us to move in this direction and have that kind of conversation?
Yeah,
You know,
I would also, oh,
Yeah, go Chloe. Go ahead, Chloe.
just throw in there that I think so much of what made the bill work so well and receive such broad support was that we did solicit and welcome feedback from so many folks. And the original bill looked very different from what we had now. And so it was input from committee members who were a little bit on the fence, input from folks at the party level who were concerned about how this would impact party infrastructure. And we took all those concerns, drafted amendments, made sure everyone was okay with it, integrated it into the bill, you know, communicated with folks that these important identities were okay with the bill. And I think that kind of iterative process of building a bill is so important. It's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned this session is just, you know, no one wants to kind of hop onto something that they've had no input on or don't feel a part of. That's kind of organizing 101. And I think that it was just a really beautiful, inclusive process from day one.
One thing I wanted to say real quick is that I think oftentimes I see from activists, and I don't consider myself an activist, nor do I say activist in a pejorative way. I just feel folks who are very passionate about an issue feel like they have to get 100% of something or else they don't want it at all. And I think it's important to recognize that even if you get 30% of what you want now, it's a long game, you know, and just then keep chipping away at it. That I think is a good approach to take, as opposed to saying, well, we want completely open primaries or nothing, you know.
I just wanted to add one more thing that I think is important.
Yeah.
We also worked with several other organizations who were really helpful. So I don't know if Eric Bronner's on the call, but Veterans for Political Innovations really helped us connect with veterans and help make that argument that this really impacts veterans. And we know that that was very compelling. And also the League of Women Voters of Maine, who, you know, not 5 years ago did not support semi-open primary legislation and have, you know, moved to neither being for nor against to now supporting. And, you know, the day of the House vote, we had, you know, their entire organization was helping to confirm votes, just as, you know, Senator Pouliot was texting his friends and his relationships, and Senator Maxman was texting hers, and Kyle was in caucus, you know, whipping up the votes and making sure everybody's okay. And you know, I was sitting there playing quarterback on the spreadsheet, saying, okay, we need one, you know, we need one more, we need how it was, and then, and because we did not know if we had the votes that morning. You know, we did not. There was about 10 legislators we had not ID'd, and we needed to get all 10 of them to get over the finish line. And it was exciting that morning, having everybody, and the Republican lobbyists were a huge help with that as well. So Senator, thank you for bringing them up. So
one final comment is that having been part of the process in 2017 and 2019, something that you, Caitlin, and Betsy, and Kyle, who were part of the earlier efforts, that was so impressive was the insistence that all the objections that were raised during the losses, that those not be treated as, oh, these are our implacable enemies. They were merely, okay, how do we address that? How do we move forward on that? How do we challenge that? There was no demonization of the people that voted against Bill number 1 and Bill number 2. And I think that was played such an important role, even if they were different people, in creating a momentum where this thing could get over the top. And everything Chloe's saying about the involvement of legislators in the final product, that just seems so important. We have time for one more question, and then Russell has an announcement and a very exciting update. So I'm trying to create some suspense here. So we're going to John in California. John, keep it brief. We've got 2 minutes for a response, and then we got to wrap things up.
Okay, yeah, it's just my main point is that you really need to go to fully open primaries like we have in California. How do we get there?
Oh, so you want to ask a huge question with 2 minutes left. Okay. Any quick top line thoughts on that?
I would just say that, certainly the reason I think that semi-open primary succeeded in Maine is that not everybody involved in the effort agrees with that premise, that we do need to go to fully open primaries. And I think that this was a really good and important place for us, given the political climate and what the interests here in Maine are. So I'll just leave it with that.
And I would just say, I think every state, every jurisdiction has to do what's right for those communities. And, one reform that's a good fit somewhere, may not be the right reform to do somewhere else or to lead with. Again, some of these things are incremental, and, you can't always get, as Senator Pouliot said, ask for what you want, but be willing to negotiate and compromise and also be smart about what you put forward. Because I've certainly learned this from working on other bills. You get a bill title and it's framed one way, you might have a hard time even getting a resolve passed because it's already planted the idea in someone's head about what this is or what your motivations are. So I think you have to be smart and strategic and play the long game if you're interested in moving, big reforms forward. And as someone who led the ranked choice voting campaigns in Maine and then transitioned over to being a legislator from an advocate, that wasn't just something we did in a year or two. It took 15 years of conversations to build up to that point. And so if you're pushing big, bold reform, know that that you got to play the long game and be willing to accept and work with coalitions of people who may or may not be with you down the road, but know that if you're willing to bite rather than take the whole thing, that you may start building coalitions and bring people into that conversation who, because you're building relationships of trust and collaborating with them on a smaller issue, maybe people who wouldn't have been with you when you get to the big reform, but maybe they will be with you because they've seen the light, essentially, and are with you in that journey. So, be smart, play the long game.
Everyone, I apologize. I have to hop off at a hard
stop
at 3.
Thank you so much, Senator, and thank you, Senator Maxman and Caitlin and Betsy and Kyle. You guys really are heroes of the movement, and congrats on it. And I know we still have to get the governor to sign the bill and the Appropriations Committee, so we're not done yet. But before we end, I just want to turn it over to Russ for a couple quick announcements. Go ahead, Russ.
Yes, thank you, John. As many of you have seen, this past month, we've been running our an annual fundraising campaign for the Open Primaries Education Fund. And we set big goals. We set a big goal of hitting $250,000 for this month, which is massive. But the issue of open primaries has gone mainstream. So there's a lot of things in the next year that we want to tackle and we want to be able to take on. And so just this morning, one of our best, most generous, biggest donors has come on board to do a $25,000 matching gift between now and Sunday night at midnight. So we have 4 days to use this to the best and fullest and with the most potential. So please, if you haven't given to the Open Primaries Education Fund, please give today or in the next 4 days. It will go double its worth. And it will be so helpful in helping us hit this massive goal that we have set. It is tax deductible, and it would mean a lot to our entire team. So if you haven't given yet, please consider giving. I'm putting it in the chat right now, the link, and we will be sending a follow-up email as well. But please consider giving and making a tax deductible donation to the Open Primaries Education Fund. And if you have given already, if you give again, it's worth double. So so thank you so much. We
Give
really
twice.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks, Russ. We're over time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Our next call will be on July 15th, where Danny Ortega and myself will be interviewing Cecilia Bailly, who is a brilliant researcher looking at new trends in the Latino community. That's going to be a great discussion, information coming up. Then we're taking the rest of the summer off, and we'll resume our virtual discussion series in the fall. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.